A kitchen table in suburban Virginia, 2 coffee mugs, a set of car keys, and a wife asking the same question she has asked every evening for 8 years. How was work today? The operator sitting across from her gives the same answer he rehearsed on the drive home from Fort Bragg. Training went fine. Long day. Nothing interesting. She nods. He changes the subject. Most people assume the silence around special operations is protective, that it shields the family from worry, that the less a wife knows, the safer she sleeps. Most people are wrong. The silence is the price of admission into the most elite fighting force the United States military has ever built. And the cost is paid in full by people who never raised their right hand, never enlisted, and never asked to carry a classified burden on their kitchen counter every single night. There is a specific cover story that the unit teaches every newly selected operator during his first week inside the compound at Fort Bragg. A single rehearsed sentence, designed to survive years of repetition without cracking. We will get to that sentence. But first, you need to understand what happens to a marriage the moment a man is told he has been chosen for 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. The day a soldier is selected, a family liaison officer from the Pentagon contacts the operator's wife. In most cases, this is the first time the wife hears the formal name of the organization her husband has just joined. She is brought to a small office, usually inside the Joint Special Operations Command headquarters compound, and she sits across from a person whose entire job is to prepare military spouses for a life they did not volunteer for. The briefing is short, and the message is blunt. Your husband now works in a unit that does not officially exist. You will not be told where he goes. You will not be told when he will return. You will not be given a timeline, a phone number, or a point of contact beyond this office. The liaison officer explains that the wife will undergo a security clearance background interview, not because she is being given access to classified material, but because the government needs to verify that she will not become a liability. The interview covers her personal history, her social media habits, her circle of friends, and her psychological stability under stress. At the end of the briefing, the wife is asked to sign nothing. There is no non-disclosure agreement, no formal contract, no paper trail. The absence of paperwork is deliberate. A signed document can be subpoenaed. A verbal understanding cannot. The wife walks out of that office carrying the heaviest kind of secret, the kind that has no official record and therefore no official support structure behind it. What the liaison officer does not say is just as important as what she does say. The wife is not told what to tell her own mother when she calls asking why her son-in-law missed Thanksgiving again. She is not told how to explain the stitches on his forearm when the neighbors notice them at the block party. She is not told what to say to her 7-year-old daughter when the girl asks why daddy leaves in the middle of the night with a duffel bag and comes back 3 weeks later, 10 pounds lighter with a sunburn that does not match any training base in North Carolina. Those answers, the wife is expected to invent on her own. Now, the cover story. The one the unit teaches during the first week inside the compound. The sentence is simple, and that simplicity is the entire point. The operator tells anyone who asks that he works as a civilian contractor supporting military training exercises. That single line is engineered to be vague enough to survive cross-examination at a family dinner table, boring enough that most people stop asking follow-up questions, and plausible enough that it fits the operator's appearance, schedule, and general lifestyle. He drives a plain sedan. He wears civilian clothes. He keeps his hair slightly longer than a conventional soldier. Everything about his outward life is built to support that one sentence. But the cover story has rules. The first rule is that an operator must never add unnecessary detail. The moment you say you were consulting for a defense firm in Tampa, you have created a traceable claim. A curious father-in-law can Google defense contractors in Tampa. A suspicious wife can check flight records. Specificity is the enemy. The second rule is consistency. The operator gives the same line to his wife, his parents, his neighbors, and his old army buddies. One version for all audiences. The moment 2 people compare notes and find a discrepancy, the cover starts to unravel. The third rule, and this is the one that breaks the most marriages, is that the operator must never correct a lie with the truth. If a wife catches an inconsistency and confronts him, the trained response is to offer another layer of vagueness, not to confess. Because the moment the operator admits that one thing was a lie, the wife begins asking which other things were lies too, and there is no clean answer to that question. Some operators rotate through secondary cover stories depending on the absence. A 2-week disappearance becomes an FBI task force support assignment. A 6-week gap becomes a training rotation at a facility in the Southwest. A 3-month deployment becomes a contractor consulting gig overseas. Each story is designed to match the length of the absence and require no verification. The operators who survive the longest in the unit are not the ones with the most convincing lies. They are the ones whose wives stop asking questions altogether. And that silence is where the real damage happens. Because most wives figure it out. Not from a single revelation, but from 1,000 small patterns that accumulate over years at the kitchen table, and the bedroom doorway, and the garage where the gear appears and then vanishes. The phone calls that cut off mid-sentence. The pager that buzzes at 2 a.m, followed by a husband pulling on boots in the dark. The scars that do not match any training accident he has ever described. The passport in the drawer with stamps from countries he never mentioned visiting. The photograph on the shelf from a deployment he said was routine, except the man standing beside him in the photograph was later identified in a newspaper as a member of a hostage rescue team that officially does not exist. There is also a social dimension that nobody talks about. The wives of Delta operators live inside a small community near Fort Bragg where every woman on the street is carrying the same unspoken knowledge. They see each other at the grocery store, at school pickup, at the neighborhood cookout. They recognize the same look on each other's faces when the husbands disappear simultaneously and the news runs footage of a hostage rescue in a country none of them are supposed to know about. But the wives do not talk to each other about it either. The security culture is so deeply embedded that even the informal support network between spouses operates under the same rules of silence. A wife whose husband has been gone for 11 weeks cannot call another operator's wife and ask if her husband is gone too, because confirming a pattern confirms an operation. Most wives reach a point where they understand what their husband does. They do not say it aloud, because saying it aloud forces a confrontation that neither side wants to have. The wife does not want to hear her husband lie to her face again, and the husband does not want to choose between the truth and his career. So the understanding sits between them like furniture, always present, never acknowledged, slowly taking up more and more space in the marriage until there is no room left for honesty about anything. The compound at Fort Bragg has a phrase for this. They call it the need-to-know marriage. Both people know. Neither person admits it. The relationship functions on a mutual agreement to pretend. If you are watching this and you served, or you live next to someone who served, you already understand this dynamic. But if this is the kind of content that gives you a window into a world most civilians never see, take 5 seconds and subscribe to this channel. We cover the operational culture inside Tier 1 units, the parts that do not make it into the movies or the memoirs. And if you are already subscribed, drop a comment telling us whether you think the secrecy policy protects families or destroys them. We read every single one. The children dimension adds another fracture line inside the operator's household. The question of when and whether to tell the kids is one that every Delta operator eventually confronts, and the overwhelming majority choose never. The logic is simple on the surface. A child cannot keep a secret, and a secret shared with a child is a secret shared with every teacher, coach, and playground friend that child talks to over the next decade. But the deeper reason is more uncomfortable. Telling a child the truth means admitting that the father has been lying to the entire family for years, and that admission rewrites the child's understanding of who their father is. The result is that most operators' children grow up believing their father held a boring government desk job or worked as a training consultant for the Army. The kids do their school projects about what their dad does for a living and write 2 sentences about military consulting. They bring home career day forms and their father signs them without ever considering what it would mean to walk into a 4th grade classroom and tell the truth. They do not learn the real story until they are adults, and in many cases, they do not learn it from their father at all. They learn it at funerals. When a Delta operator dies, whether in combat or years later from natural causes, the memorial service at the compound chapel on Fort Bragg becomes the first time many family members hear the real history spoken aloud. Former teammates deliver eulogies that reference operations, deployments, and sacrifices that the family never knew occurred. Grandchildren sit in wooden pews and hear for the first time that the quiet man who built birdhouses in the garage spent 3 decades conducting hostage rescues and direct action raids in countries whose names were never mentioned at the Blag dinner table. The funeral becomes the declassification event. And for the children who grew up inside that silence, the grief is layered with something else. The realization that they never fully knew their own father while he was alive. A smaller number of operators handle the children question differently. Some wait until the child turns 18 and is old enough to carry the weight. They sit the young adult down, usually in a truck or a workshop, somewhere private and familiar, and they explain what the job actually was. The reaction varies. Some children feel pride. Others feel betrayal, not because the father served, but because the father chose the mission over honesty with his own family every single day for 2 decades. The answer the father gives in that moment determines whether the relationship deepens or fractures permanently. Then there are the operators who refuse to lie at all. A small number of men selected for the unit made a personal decision to tell their wives the full truth from the beginning. These men believed that a marriage built on deception was not a marriage worth protecting, and they accepted the consequences of that position. The consequences were real. In most cases, the unit's leadership did not formally punish an operator for disclosing his assignment to his wife. There is no regulation that criminalizes telling your spouse where you work. But the informal penalty was isolation. Teammates stopped inviting the operator to social gatherings where operational matters might be discussed casually. Leadership assigned him to less sensitive taskings. The trust network inside the unit, which runs entirely on the assumption that every man protects the same secrets in the same way, quietly excluded him. The operator's career did not end, but his trajectory inside the compound flattened. And the wives who received the full truth paid their own price. A wife who knows exactly where her husband is going and exactly how dangerous the mission is does not sleep better than the wife who suspects but cannot confirm. She sleeps worse, because she carries specific images instead of vague worries. She knows the country. She knows the target. She knows that the helicopter her husband boarded has a mechanical failure rate that the crew chief mentioned at a backyard barbecue 6 months ago. The truth, for these wives, did not liberate them from anxiety. It replaced one kind of suffering with another. The unit's reported divorce rate sits at roughly 90%. That number has circulated in memoirs, interviews with retired operators, and congressional briefings on special operations family welfare for years. Whether the precise figure is 85 or 92 does not change the conclusion. The vast majority of marriages inside 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta do not survive the operator's career. The causes are not mysterious. Repeated long absences with no explanation, a communication blackout that can last months, the physical and psychological toll of sustained combat operations, and the corrosive effect of living inside a lie that both partners maintain but neither partner chose. The surviving 10%, the marriages that endure, share a pattern that retired operators describe consistently. The couples who stayed together were the ones who built a second language. Not honesty, because full honesty was never permitted, but a way of communicating around the silence. The wife learned not to ask where he was going. The operator learned to say, "This one is hard," without saying more, and the wife learned that those 4 words meant she should prepare for a longer absence and a quieter homecoming. They replaced information with presence. The operator who came home and sat with his family at the kitchen table, even when he could not say a single true sentence about his day, and the wife who accepted that presence as enough, those were the marriages that held. The surviving couples also shared a willingness to rebuild after retirement. Once the operator left the unit and the secrecy requirements loosened, the couples who made it were the ones who used that window to have the conversations they had been deferring for 15 or 20 years. They sat on the back porch of their house and talked about the deployments, the fear, the loneliness, and the cost. Not as a confession, but as a slow repair of a foundation that had been cracked since the first briefing at the compound. The marriages that failed were often the ones where the operator retired and continued the silence out of habit, even when the operational reason for it was gone. Every Delta operator makes the same calculation on the day he is selected. He stands in a doorway between 2 versions of his life. Behind him is the marriage, the family, the kitchen table where his wife is waiting for an honest answer to a simple question. In front of him is the compound, the team, the mission, and a career that will define him for the rest of his life but will require him to lie to the person he swore to protect. The unit does not force that choice. The unit simply makes the terms clear and lets the operator walk through the door. The wives never get the briefing on what the door costs. They find out one deployment at a time, one silence at a time, one funeral at a time. If this is the first War Code video you have watched, we have an entire library covering the selection process, the operational culture, and the human cost inside America's Tier 1 Special Operations units. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. And leave us your answer to this question, because we want to hear it. Should the Pentagon give operators' wives a genuine informed consent briefing before selection, the same way a surgeon gives a patient informed consent before an operation? Or would that level of honesty make it impossible for the unit to function? Tell us in the comments.